Will the U.S. government engage in technology protectionism? Will the U.S. government make it harder for TikTok to operate? If you look at what China has done to U.S. tech companies, they've done this to the nth degree. I mean, they're completely off the chart. They're off the spectrum. The spectrum doesn't even have a reading.
U.S. opens national security investigation into TikTok. National security review of TikTok owner Beijing ByteDance. So they bought this company called Musical.ly. It's now called TikTok. ByteDance is the largest private tech company in the world, worth over $80 billion, Chinese company. They have TikTok-esque content platforms in China and other platforms. It's actually already in platform conglomerate status. It says here about 60% of TikTok's 26.5 million monthly active users in the United States are between the ages of 16 and 24. So what you say to yourself is, will the U.S. government engage in technology protectionism? Will the U.S. government make it harder for TikTok to operate? And do I think that this is a bad thing? No, I don't. If you look at what China has done to U.S. tech companies, they've done this to the nth degree. I mean, they're completely off the chart. They're off the spectrum. The spectrum doesn't even have a reading for how much Chinese tech protectionism they have. And guess what? It's actually worked brilliantly for China. And they have out of the top 10 tech companies in the world, 6 of them are Chinese. I'd say that's a pretty amazing feat considering that 10 years ago, all of the top 10 tech companies were US. So clearly, China's on a tear. If any stat you look at, amount of venture investing in China, amount of tech companies and all these things. I mean, the Chinese tech sector is strong, and it's because the Chinese government basically didn't allow in any U.S. tech companies. And if they did, they'd just steal their IP and all these kinds of other things that we're all pretty familiar with at this point. So, should the U.S. ban TikTok outright? I doubt they would do something that aggressive. But the U.S. could do something in the middle, which would be kind of what China is somewhat mandating U.S. companies do today, but rightly so, they're still pretty reticent to actually trust the Chinese government. It's kind of an oxymoron, trusting the Chinese government. But you come to the U.S. and you're a Chinese tech company, okay, all of your data now needs to live in U.S.-based servers. And the U.S. can put some monitoring on if that data is now leaving the U.S. to China. And so now you're putting privacy and controls into what data is going back to China. I was at another conference today, Bloomberg's conference. Jim Coulter, co-founder of TPG, one of the largest and most prominent private equity firms in the world. He had a great chart showing the different countries and how they felt about data localization and whether they would let data leave their country or not, or keep it restricted in their respective domain. And you can kind of guess that China and the US are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. The US was probably one of the lightest or least regulated countries in the world in this map that they had. There are select industries like the defense industry where the US government puts very strict data requirements around what companies can have access to that data and where it can go, can it leave, etc. On the other end of the spectrum was China, which basically nothing can leave China unless they approve it, which I don't see why they really ever would. TikTok could be one of those scenarios, or Chinese tech companies that fit a certain level of prominence or scale could be one of those scenarios where there is now regulation around mandating that the servers are here, that you have personnel here, that you have all your people here in the United States. So from a job standpoint, from an assimilation standpoint, from being able to hold people accountable standpoint, you need people here. And then from a data standpoint, that you're putting more controls and monitoring and regulation around that. I think that's a pretty reasonable reaction to this. And I think certainly in the grand scheme of things, compared to how U.S. tech companies have been treated in China, this is isn't anything even in comparison of how U.S. tech companies have been treated. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Not even really that familiar. Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. I think they are reviewing ByteDance's acquisition of Musical.ly/TikTok. And they're saying that never received clearance from this committee, which means they're now able to review it, even though we are over 2 years later after the transaction completed. So I guess that it's still under their purview to put some kind of rules or regulation around this. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.